with a update on the cannabis work that is being done, being provided by the Regional Chief and Chief Don Tom, both of whom are with us here in the central Zoom room. And then our attention to the Bcafn Governance Committee. You'll see on the agenda the names of the Governance Committee members, and we'll look to Chief Aileen Prince for an update on that, as well as Daryl Haynes, the legal counsel. We are then, pending quorum, will move to the appointment to the Governance Committee to fill a vacancy, which is the beginning of our resolutions process. Following that, we will carry on with the remainder of the resolutions, on-time resolutions, and the board is processing the late resolutions. And, in the process, that's the work that gets done before they come to the floor. A Federal New Democratic Party, Jagmeet Singh, who will be joining us by video from his campaign bus at 11:45. At 12:05, we'll turn to the Chief Electoral Officer for the election results, and then following that, the remarks from the successful candidate, as well as from the two board members whose positions were acclaimed and noted earlier. And then we will look to close, targeting 1 p.m. for our closing remarks from the Regional Chief and from our knowledge keepers. So with that, let us, I do have a quick announcement. Yesterday, I failed to note that there was a door prize drawn, and congratulations to Chief Byron Lewis. He won that door prize yesterday, and we will pick up that work as we go through today. So with that, noting the time, and let us turn our attention to the Regional Chief at microphone 7, I believe, and Chief Don Chom at microphone 3 for the cannabis update.
Thank you, Harold. Deneza Tekuza Skyza. First of all, I want to acknowledge the territory that we're on, the Coast Salish people, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Just want to thank you all for once again attending our AGM here, the 18th annual AGM of the Assembly of First Nations. Certainly, it has been a trying time over the last several months, approximately 18 months since the pandemic has occurred. And as part of the economic development portfolio on a national level, my portfolio has included cannabis from the AFN and from the National Chief. And at the national level, the efforts of the Chiefs Committee, which I am chair of, the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis, we continued to work in terms of really looking at our perspective from different regions. And in terms of what has occurred, there's definitely different perspectives from all regions and all provinces in terms of how to govern cannabis, and that's really been the difficulty from a national level, and really developing that strategy from a First Nations perspective. And despite the fact that we're experiencing this pandemic, we continue to work, and certainly a lot of the meetings that we wanted to hold have been put on hold. Many First Nations across the country have different perspectives, and certainly some of them have asserted their rights and their ability to govern themselves in terms of how to best govern in terms of the issue of cannabis. So that's some of the work that we've done in terms of the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis, and as when this piece of in terms of economic development hit my desk, we wanted to have a real aggressive and more frequent meetings. We did at the start before the pandemic. We also want perspective from different regions in terms of what we needed to amend in terms of the Cannabis Act So as we deal with the issues of the pandemic, we've also had these many different changes that have occurred over the last several years in terms of Bill C-41, the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Also the Declaration as it was passed as law as of June 21st of this year federally. So First Nations jurisdiction in cannabis certainly has been mentioned during this time right now of uncertainty as we go through this election, and certainly our national chief has brought up the issue during this election period, and our perspective from the AFN in terms of the document that you all know is called A Healing Path Forward. And really, I think I suppose cannabis is a litmus test in terms of jurisdiction and how we assert ourselves in terms
Recording in
of
progress.
law. And it's a good example of how we can assert ourselves in terms of asserting those laws from our Indigenous peoples. In terms of the provincial level of BC First Nations cannabis strategy, I think First Nations are currently, we're involved in cannabis through a variety of legal frameworks. The First Nations Land Management Act, Section 119 agreements under the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, following the provincial and federal licensing systems and passing their own sovereign laws. However, changes still need to be made, starting with the Cannabis Act. And one of the things that we need to get a perspective on from not only from British Columbia but elsewhere is what do we want amended in the Cannabis Act? And that's really some of the discussions that need to be had. I'm glad that Chief Harvey Macleod is here, not only on my board, but also our representative on the Cannabis Working Group provincially, but also as part of the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis and representing British Columbia. So certainly many issues are being dealt with provincially, regionally, and also federally in terms of our, really, I think, going through different regions and knowing full well how different First Nations assert their sovereignty and self-determination in terms of how to deal with cannabis. So next slide. So JERPA Action Plan, the province is, BC certainly is working with our First Nations Leadership Council in terms of the Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And the alignment of laws is quite important in terms of not only how we deal with the issues of cannabis and the Cannabis Act, but also many other matters. And we've brought this up several times with different legislations, whether it's child welfare, forestry, environmental assessment. Really, the alignment of laws needs to happen within the Cannabis Act, and also how we take over jurisdiction over cannabis in terms of how we best deal and manage the issue of cannabis, whether it's health, recreational use, or medicinal uses of cannabis. Certainly, there's definitely different perspectives from different First Nations communities. There are communities that do not want to get into this business, which is that's good. That's a perspective from many First Nations communities. But there are also many First Nations communities that want to utilize cannabis as part of their economic development plan in the future. So it's important to have our perspectives being brought forward. So in terms of the draft action plan, I think it's important that we do have our perspective being brought forward and how it is reflected in terms of the Declaration of Rights as Indigenous Peoples Act, and in terms of really going forward and an expression of our sovereignty and self-determination. Next slide. Don, I think you're taking over.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank Elder Bobby Joe. I'd like to say Gala Kasla for the opening prayer this morning and starting us off in a good way. Secondly, I'd like to thank Regional Chief Terry Teegee for that high-level update. A little bit of cannabis humor to start our day off. Thank you, Regional Chief. I am Chief Don Tom, Vice President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and BC First Nations Leadership Council Cannabis Working Group member. I'm Chief of Sartlet First Nation and happy to provide an update today. As said, the Cannabis Working Group has been involved in projects to support First Nations participation in the cannabis industry. Today, I'd like to I would like to provide you with an update on some of the work that we've been doing. As Regional Chief shared, we've been working on a series of engagement sessions to receive feedback for the development of the BC First Nations cannabis strategy. The first session held on August 10th did give us some useful feedback on priority changes. We should direct our advocacy work towards legislative changes. The next engagement session will be virtually this fall, October 20th and 21st, and November 17th. Next slide, I believe. With the August 10th session, some of the feedback we received was First Nations jurisdiction over cannabis needs to extend to traditional territory, not just the reserve lands. This has been a difficult conversation with the province when it comes to recognition and jurisdiction, and the province is holding the same position that our jurisdiction is only over reserve lands and not traditional lands. But this is one of our priority areas. Relations between CSU and First Nations communities needs to change. It's unacceptable that enforcement activity is being undertaken on First Nations land without the consent of First Nations. Also, culturally informed education needs to be provided to eliminate the stigma of cannabis. Work needs to be done to ensure compassionate access to cannabis for those in need. Slide 7, please. The October 20th session is slated to focus on economic development topics in cannabis. We want to take the time to discuss the red market and make space for First Nations in cannabis industry to share their experiences and lessons learned thus far. We're also looking to receive feedback on the economic development support initiative we have been working on to date. Also looking to put forward some potential cannabis taxation and revenue sharing models, which to gather insight on how we might be able to move forward on this in BC. I think there's a couple models in a couple areas that we've worked together and collaborated on, specifically with gaming revenue. So I think there are some ways of moving forward when it comes to revenue sharing and taxation. Next slide. For October 21st session, its focus will be around jurisdiction and governance work. We will be discussing key strategies, opportunities, and challenges in advancing First Nations jurisdiction in cannabis. We will also be looking to invite advanced written submissions and presentations from First Nations on the topic. This day will also feature a focus on the topic of health and community safety, which is being co-developed with the First Nations Health Authority. We will be focusing on how we can provide culturally informed education around cannabis use. Some of the feedback we have received has been that there is not enough focus on the willingness and spiritual aspects of cannabis, and we want to change that. We will also be discussing possible roles for a BC First Nations cannabis institution, which has come up in our engagements so far. This session will explore what type of role that institutions might have. Some of the feedback we have received thus far has shown interest in it providing standards and testing services as well as education. Next slide, please. For the report back session on November 17th, we'll be presenting on the draft of BC First Nations cannabis strategy to gather feedback on it. In our current advocacy regarding jurisdiction, in our August 10th session engagement, we received comments from First Nations leadership and community members in BC about their interactions with the Community Safety Unit on reserve lands. In BC, the Community Safety Unit handles most cannabis enforcement action on behalf of the province. Cannabis businesses are only protected by agreements or laws under certain legal frameworks within a First Nations reserve land. This needs to extend to a First Nations traditional territory. First Nations communities who have reported negative interactions with the CSU, such as the CSU pursuing landlords of cannabis businesses with expensive fines and other penalties. There has also been a desire expressed from First Nations to utilize their own security forces on their own territory, as opposed to dealing with the CSU. Advocacy needs to be done to coordinate a conversation between First Nations leadership and CSU needs to happen soon to come to better understandings, pardon me. Along with engagement sessions, we're involved with a number of cannabis projects with the provincial and federal governments. I will go through them briefly. Slide 12, Strategic Partnership Initiative, which is the initiative involving Health Canada, ISK, and the FNL, and funded through ISK, is intended to create funding opportunities for Indigenous cannabis projects in BC and facilitate access to business regulatory expertise. Lack of capital and capacity are two major gaps with this funding. Major gaps this funding will seek to address. We have received approval and funding to begin and establish this program, and we're currently developing the final proposal that we hope to secure a multi-year funding and enable 20 projects to be funded within the next 3 years. Next slide. We'll also be working on the Cannabis Market Access Project. This project involves the BC Cannabis Secretariat and the FNLC. This is a research project aimed at responding to informed gaps for First Nations in the cannabis sector by convening First Nations involved in the cannabis space and conducting jurisdictional scans. We will gain a better insight as the opportunities and challenges for First Nations involved in cannabis businesses. This working group has also engaged in discussions regarding 3 of the province's cannabis-related policy initiatives: the BC Indigenous Shelf Space Program, Farm Gate Policy, and Direct Delivery. Slide. Wet my whistle too. No. The BC Indigenous Self-Space Program. This program is set to highlight cannabis products for Indigenous producers in BC cannabis stores. However, we believe that the program could go further in capturing economic benefits for First Nations and that it should be led by First Nations institutions. This is still opportunity input regarding, there is still opportunity to provide input regarding this program with the working group or Cannabis Secretariat. Next slide. This is also the farm to gate policy set to be implemented in fall of 2022. This is intended to give BC cannabis growers the ability to sell their products directly to consumers from stores located at their production site, something not currently allowed under the BC regulations. BC is continuing to seek input on this policy for those who may be interested. Next slide. Lastly, there is the direct delivery policy. This program is intended to allow cannabis producers to provide their products straight to retailers. Consultation is happening with industry partners now to get feedback into early fall of 2021, with phase 2 of the process expected to begin in fall of 2021. So far, this looks like the only cultivators who produce less than 300,000 kilograms cannabis a year would be eligible. There have been some criticisms as it would exclude some First Nations producers. Hopefully that has given you a bit of an overview of the work that we've been involved in over the past year. We look forward to continuing to advance First Nations interest in jurisdiction when it comes to cannabis over the next year. There's a big push from the FNLC working group around jurisdiction, around taxation, ensuring that First Nations hold the rightful place in not only on your reserve lands, but within your traditional territories. And I think with the work that we're advancing collectively here in BC, I think that there's much for us to leverage here working together. I'd also like to acknowledge Chief Harvey, who's also here and who's also on the Cannabis Working Group. That is my update. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you very much, Chief. We do have a few moments for questions or comments from the delegation. I'll look to the raise hands function. Chief Byron Lewis.
Good morning, Byron Lewis, Chief of the Okanagan Band. I like what I'm hearing, about the development of cannabis, and as everyone knows that, talk about us and, having the number of dispensaries and, development of our own bylaw. And I would like to stress that there's a lot of work that needs to go into this whole thing on the cannabis strategy and how it's going to roll out. After, I think it's, what is it now, 3 years? And it's been my experiences that either the First Nations have to control the entire process and make sure that it is managed and monitored correctly, because one of the, the effects of this is not only is that if it's not, it opens the door to having people that are coming into your community that you would not necessarily want. And the other one is this can actually open the door to such things as money laundering, and you can't actually manage or be accountable for this entire process if you're not somehow being that party that manages the production and distribution and allowing for dispensaries to carry on. There's some examples around the province of people that are actually done this, but I really got to say is that this opens the door for a lot. And if you're not able to control this, think for a moment when people start talking about a gray market. Well, who is the gray market? Where is this gray market coming from if it's not from a recognized cannabis operation? And these are some of the things you really need to ask, because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to be getting pushes in there for other types of substances, and it can actually lead to demands. Well, let's open up mushrooms, let's open up. And, you have to be careful. You have to go in there with your eyes wide open and understand completely the magnitude of when you have dispensaries that are open in your community, because it brings a lot of elements that you need to be prepared for. And again, it's the only way that you could actually provide the ability to manage is to make sure that you have control over the process. And that means what is being sold. And there is no other solution for that. And one of the things I brought up to the province is, and I told them, what is the problem of us being able to develop our own bylaws? This goes back to the creation. It goes back to the beginnings of what we, is commonly referred to the two-row wampum, and goes all the way through with covenant change up to the present day. And I said, what is the problem of having, parallel bylaws that go towards, or laws that go towards a certain measure? In this term, it's public safety and also economic development to go hand in hand. I told them there should be no threat to a First Nation developing their own, or a nation developing their own laws that govern this, especially for public safety. So I think that is something that this really needs to take a look at and make sure that these types of measures are taken care of, because if you don't, it can get out of hand very quickly. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chief Lewis. Let us go to Chief Jerome Jack.
Tesla, good morning. My name is Clarko Gala. I'm with you today from Macleod Territory in Gold River. I just have a question. The last time I was at a meeting, I brought up, and our lawyer in Victoria still says that if we dabble in the cannabis industry, we can kiss going across the U.S. border goodbye. Is that still the case? Because I like to travel freely to the USA, and if dabbling in this industry is going to refrain me from doing it, that's a concern. I like the idea of stores because it's safer than buying it off the street or in somebody's house. But anyway, that's my question, because I know our people want to get into the industry, but our lawyers are still saying there's a border issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Tonton.
Thank you for the question, Chief. I'm not a lawyer, but I played one on TV once. And what I was advised when this question came up too, because I had the exact same question, and what was advised to me is to be very honest with the people at the border when you cross, and when you're crossing for cannabis business or whatever it may be. I think the likelihood of not telling the truth when you cross the border may be more harmful than saying why you're crossing the border. There's been many in the industry who continue to cross the border, and they're fine getting across. So tell me how it goes, Chief, when you cross the border. But I think you should be fairly fine.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chief Tom. Yeah, I presume it's more around whether there's possession or whether there's a record.
No, if you're, there's been a lot of hesitancy around those, even in the industry, and that even those who are part of the business, I think that it's, I guess some were having difficult crossing the border, but I think that was the worry in the beginning, that although you may not even use cannabis, if you're involved in the industry, somehow I guess you're flagged in the system, but I don't think that's the case. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Any response to Chief Lewis's comments, just in terms of the anxieties, other anxieties?
Yeah, I think with Chief Lewis and well aware of the situation that was going on in your community, and for us to have a larger role in the cannabis industry, and for, I think, First Nations to have direct control within their lands and territories, and with the CSU being able to come in within our reserve lands, I think gives many of us, our home territories, not our reserve lands, our home territories, I think gives a number of us anxiety, but your input is very important. I think if there is, as I suggested in the, there is opportunity for First Nations still to continue to provide input to the province, and I would encourage any First Nations who wish to provide that input, please do so. But thank you for your comments today.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would note Chief Ken Watts has also made a comment in the chat, reminding us all about the toolkit that is available and has been provided previously. So thank you very much for that. Are there any further questions or comments from the delegation? If not, and I'll keep an eye on that, I'll look back to the regional chief and to Chief Tom for any closing comments.
Thank you, Harold. One thing we got to think about, and this was the work that we've been doing from the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis, is amendments made to the criminal code, because fundamentally, and if you think about it, many First Nations have passed their own laws in regards to really jurisdiction within their communities. And we've seen it in the past 18 months, passing band council resolutions in terms of protecting their community against this pandemic of COVID-19 and putting up really, checkpoints and perhaps roadblocks in of really asserting their jurisdictions. And so there's a real similar First Nations doing the same things in terms of governing cannabis within their community. So passing band council resolutions or their own laws in terms of governing cannabis within their territory. So that really means asserting your governance, your sovereignty, self-determination. But the thing is that fundamentally, under the Canadian law, you're still in theory, breaking the law. So there needs to be amendments made to the criminal code, not only for the sale of cannabis, and these are the discussions that we had with Minister Blair, Minister Lametti, but it's also too, this reflects the conversation we've had in terms of gaming as well. So amendments do have to be made with the federal government in terms of the criminal code. And really, I think what I'm pleased with is that many communities across the country started passing their own laws in terms of regulation and jurisdiction over cannabis within your territory. That's really what I'm excited about, is the expression of your self-determination, your sovereignty in terms of how to best govern cannabis. Not all communities are going to be in the industry, but I think that expression is a good thing. And the more that we see First Nations communities pass their own laws or pass band council resolutions in the meantime, is an expression of your sovereignty and your self-determination. So that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Chief Councillor Ken Watts, for the reminder of the toolkit. I know that many of our First Nations here in BC, whether you have businesses or cannabis dispensaries on your lands or within your territories, I know that many of our First Nations are having to respond to maybe CP holders or others who may want to put these dispensaries within our communities. And I feel the struggle, and I know that for my community as well, that we're having to use our own resources to respond and address to cannabis. And I think that there needs to be resources made available to all First Nations here in BC, not just those involved in either Section 116 agreements or whatever it may be, but resources need to be provided to all First Nations within BC because it's affecting much of us. And when we're creating these bylaws, or when we're looking to entertain whether a dispensary would be coming in with our territories, there's a lot of resources, legal fees that come with this, and legal opinions, and it's one area that I think we need to be provided resources. Moving forward, we're really holding the province's feet to the fire around the alignment of laws and aligning legislation with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This has to happen. And I think the way the direction is going with the cannabis industry, we need to have this. And I think it's necessary for First Nations to ultimately hold that jurisdiction of which they rightfully have, and to be able to make decisions around your territories as dispensaries go in or as dispensaries don't go in. But much work is put into this, and I thank the Cannabis Working Group for their diligent work over the number of years and really pushing the province. And the province did not want to talk about jurisdiction and recognition or revenue sharing or taxation. These were things that were consistently said by the province that they didn't have a mandate to discuss this. And it was this working group who continued to press these issues and making them a priority and ensuring that the province doesn't get off easily because they don't simply have the mandate. So excellent work from the Cannabis Working Group, and I invite you to take part in our upcoming engagement sessions, and whether it's yourself as chief or someone from your community, and even if you're not within the cannabis industry, please join us. I think you might find that you will find the discussion quite invigorating, and you'll learn a lot about the cannabis industry. So please join us in our future engagement sessions. Thank you very much, Harold.
Thank you very much. And just before we move to the Bcafn Governance Committee item, I'll ask Chief Eileen Prince to get ready for that. I do see that Chief Byron Lewis has his hand up, so let's go back to Byron for a follow-up.
I'd like to make a point. One of the things that, First Nations we really need to look into is called FinTrack, which is a Financial Transitions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada. And what the mandate is to facilitate the detection, prevention, and deterrence of money laundering and and financing terrorist activities. What this actually means is that since, cannabis production outside of current legislation, whether it be federal or provincial, can be construed as being an illegal activity. And under FinTrack, that can actually be determined. And if a band, the question is, if a band actually owns, is part of a dispensary owner or others, does that actually mean that FinTrack can actually come in? And what FinTrack does have the ability to do is to freeze your accounts until it's determined where the source of this money is and where it's being allocated. So if you're using that through your programs, does this actually mean that a band who's collecting revenues or revenues generated or some type of fee in there, does that mean that they could fall under FinTrack, which would mean that they could have their accounts frozen? That is something that's a reality, and this is the reasons why I say that we really need to look at a parallel process, because as long as people look at the benefits, but there's a number of pitfalls with cannabis that we have to be, very careful of. And again, we need the structure in place to be able to actually function in this market. And currently, I got to say that even from our band level, after 3 years in this, I am not confident that we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. All right, and let us pick up on our next discussion. On your agenda, you will see the Bcafn Governance Committee, and so you'll see the members listed there. And we are going to look to Chief Eileen Prince from Codsley Wooden to help us get situated with that. And then I believe we'll also look to Darren Haynes, the legal counsel, for some remarks. Chief Prince.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. It's a beautiful day. My name is Eileen Prince. I'm the daughter of the late Nicholas and Irene Prince and chief of Nakasley Witten. I would like to acknowledge the strong and powerful words of our knowledge keepers this morning, and thank you for that. The blessings that we get every day, sometimes we don't stop and acknowledge that. I just would really like to hold my hands up to BCAFN for always remembering to start your day with the blessings. Under the BCAFN bylaws, the Chiefs in Assembly established a standing committee once every establishes a standing committee once every 3 years, periodic review and recommend the bylaws governance manual. The committee also is tasked with addressing any complaints about the regional chief conduct or any other governance matter referred to by the board of directors. The committee is made up of 6 member delegates, reflective of regional diversity and an equal number of men and women. At the last BCAFN AGM in November 2020, the Chiefs in Assembly passed Resolution 11/2020, which appointed the current individuals to the committee. Could be Wayne Christian, Chief Courtney Adolph Jones, Chief Jerry Jack, Chief Donna Algem, Chief Maureen Lugie, and myself. And our technical team members are Darren Haynes and Maureen Bcafn. As per the committee's terms of reference, we met a handful of times to discuss a plan for work related to the review of the BCAFN bylaw and governance manual. The committee met in December, in February, April, May, and June, and currently have a meeting recently. These meetings included an in-depth review of the policies and documents related to the governance of BCAFN. Following the in-depth review, we understood a preliminary scan of potential recommendations of revisions and the identification of gaps in the policies. Darren Haynes, BCAFN Legal Counsel, will provide an overview of the work plan as well as the potential recommendations going forward, and the timeline for which the committee will engage with the chiefs for feedback and input into the governance materials. Further, I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of Chief Maureen Lugie, who acted as chair of the committee earlier this year, and she's recently stepped down due to some prior commitments within her community. And I want to thank her for her time and expertise and input into the work that the committee has been doing. After Darren provides an overview of the work plan, the chiefs will consider a resolution to fill the vacancy on this committee. And I encourage you to put your name forward to do this important work. We have a lot of work ahead of us over the next 2 years, and it's very interesting to see how the policy are evolving. Again, thank you, chiefs, for your time, and the committee looks forward to engaging with you over the fall and winter to review our governance and policies and improve our standards and how we operate. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair, and I believe that Darren will be providing the next section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Prince. We'll turn directly, thank you very much, Chief Prince, and we'll turn directly to legal counsel.
Great. Thank you, Chief Prince, for the overview of the committee's work. I'm going to take a few minutes to explain the committee's work plan. And I believe we've got
Darren is muted, is he not?
Harold, we can't hear Darren.
in phase 1 with recommendations going to the Chiefs Assembly in special Chiefs Assembly next year, so February or March. Phase 2 of the work would begin this fall, and it would be looking at more substantive changes. This work is more involved in that it first requires some briefing materials to be provided to the committee with options and policy implications of potential amendments. It's also contemplated that there would be chief engagement with these substantive amendments. Following engagement with chiefs, the format of which will be determined with input at the Special Chiefs Assembly next year. Following that chiefs engagement, there would be drafting of amendments with recommendations coming back to the Chiefs Assembly at either the AGM next year or the Special Chiefs Assembly in 2023. So you can see the Phase 2 timeline there, reaching through to the AGM in next year or the following spring in 2023. So there is a table of potential changes which I won't walk through now, but as you can see, there are quite a number of changes that the committee will be looking at. Not all of these potential changes will come forward as recommendations to the Chiefs Assembly, but stay tuned for a further update and recommendations coming at the Chiefs Assembly in March or February of next year. I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions or comments from the delegation? I see Cookby Robbins and proxy Tyrone McNeil.
Yeah, just around the policy development, is that going to be shared out to all leadership, or is that just going to be kept in-house around when it comes to human resources, or anything that may be sketchy that could be happening with the Bcafn? Is that why we're reviewing this whole policy now?
Thank you, Chief Robbins. So the reason is reviewing, this review is being conducted. It was actually part of the amendments made in 2018 to the bylaws was establishing a standing governance committee that would conduct periodic reviews every 3 years. So this is a scheduled and planned review. All changes to the bylaws and governance manual need to be adopted and ratified by the Chiefs Assembly. So no amendments will be made without input from and ratification by the Chiefs Assembly. With respect to the HR manual, so the human resources policy, that is a policy that is reviewed by the directors and can be amended and updated from time to time with their oversight. The governance committee is tasked with looking at the bylaws and governance manual, so those policies that require Chiefs Assembly input.
Thank you. Tyrone McNeil.
Thanks, Harold. Darren, good to see you again. I pleasure of working with you and your team back in 2017 when we first looked at the entire governance of Bcafn, and it's a pleasure to work with you and your firm. Like, you're a good match to continue this conversation. Harold, what I struggled with as a part of that working group back in 2017 was, I'm not sure if you should call it disassociating or separating or parsing out the provincial society, the intents and purposes of a provincial society versus First Nations leadership voting in a regional chief. Because if you look at the bylaws, simply in a society, the board of directors have authority over measures of authority, including authority over certain provisions of the regional chief, which we struggled with back then, Harold, because we vote for a regional chief based on a platform. Then we put in directors who might have different mandates or different priorities, and they may come into play. So in my view, there's a real tough balance trying to find a way of voting in somebody like, take the RC, for example, on his mandate, who is guided by a set of directors that may have different priorities. How do they work to collaborate or collide with the intentions of a regional chief that we elected, via the mandate provided? So I'm not sure where that balance is yet, Darren. If we come to any conclusion, I haven't had a chance to pay much attention to it. But I do agree that when it comes to the financial control manual, the human resources manual, that's one of the purposes of the board and senior management within the BCAFN. That's their task and that policy. But in terms of the governance review, I like that it is to be reviewed every 3 years, because it does have to be kept alive and relevant to leadership, particularly as BC Society Act changes and evolves over time as well. Just leave that there for now, Harold. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, is there any further comments from the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much, Darren, and thank you very much, Chief Prince. Chiefs and proxies, I would note that there was an indication that there's a vacancy on the governance committee. Again, due to the volume of work, our respected chief and chair had stepped down. So before we move formally forward, we will be looking for, I'm not sure if I call it a volunteer or an expression of interest, to fill that position. And my just general question at this point, is there anyone in the delegation who wishes to be on that committee? So essentially, I'm looking here. All right, having made the request and suffered through the awkward silence, I will note at this moment we don't have a volunteer. I do need to make a notification in a sense, one on quorum, one and then on the election. At this point, we do not have quorum present, and so we are unable to move forward with the resolution on the governance committee or the 3 other remaining on-time resolutions. And as noted, the board is processing 1 or 2 late resolutions to get those ready for the floor. I do want to call on the Chief Electoral Officer for an announcement. He'll come to the podium here, and then following that, we will take a recess while we look to the staff to find those 5 additional chief proxies that will help us proceed with our business. Over to the podium.
Thank you very much, Harold. I just wanted to take a moment to offer, if anybody has not received their email to cast their ballot yet, please do go ahead and reach out to us, to our helpline. You can see the helpline phone number and email there, 647-562-3880, or email there. I'll leave that up there for a moment. You can also feel free to reach me on my email address and phone number, which is all over the BCAFN website and other information you've received thus far. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ron. All right, so then I've got, let us take a 15-minute break. So we'll come back in 15 minutes. It's just a quick recess for us while we do some work online. And I will give an update at 10:17. So please do not sign out of the meeting. Once we've achieved that quorum, I will announce that and we will proceed to the resolutions. So thank you very much. We are in a brief recess.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress. Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. It is 10:30, 10:31. We're continuing to do the work to secure quorum, and the voting is still going on for the Women's Council representative. What we'll do at this point is, in terms of the agenda items we do have the information item at 11:45, which is the remarks from the leader of the New Democratic Party, Jagmeet Singh. And so let's recess until 11:45, and please come back for those remarks. Following that, we do, of course, have the announcement of the results of the election. At that point, if we have quorum present, which I'm hopeful and optimistic we will, I will request permission of the delegation to process the remaining resolutions, which is the only other business item that we do have on the agenda. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I've got 10:32, so in an hour and 13 minutes, we will reconvene for our guest, Jagmeet Singh. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and if you're able to, please remain logged in, and otherwise we will see you back here at 11:45. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.
Good morning, Chief Louis.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm okay.
Just letting
Yes,
you know, Chief Willie,
sorry, I just heard
you're
your
on
two
mute.
messages just now.
That's quite all right. Did I end up leaving you too?
Yes, yes. You were right. The first one
that, I do want to reconvene the assembly and welcome Mr. Singh to our assembly. As everyone is likely recalls, he began, I believe, he began his career as a criminal defense lawyer and also served in the provincial legislative assembly prior to becoming the federal NDP leader in 2017, I believe. My memory serves correctly, and he is also the MLA for, or the MP for Burnaby South as well. So welcome, sir, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. An honor, a tremendous honor to be here to speak with all of you. Greetings to all the chiefs, all the leaders, Grand Chief, to all the staff, to all the organizers. Thank you again for this opportunity. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that I am in between communities now on a highway between Toronto and Kingston. And so I've just left the traditional territories of the Mississaugas and the New Credit, and I'm headed on my way to another nations. But for me, it's important to acknowledge the territories that we're on, and just to acknowledge also the injustice that the First Peoples have suffered and continue to suffer, and my commitment to fight for justice. I want to also highlight something that I a bit of good news, something that's encouraging to me, and I hope it's encouraging to all of you chiefs, Grand Chief. One of the things that we are receiving in terms of feedback in this campaign, in the form of letters, emails, phone calls, messages, more so than we've ever in the past. We're getting people calling and saying that, and leaving messages and writing in to say that the reason they're supporting the New Democrats in this election is because of the work we're doing to fight for Indigenous people. And I think that's encouraging, that that is one of the biggest messages we're getting. That there is a wellspring of desire for justice amongst Canadians. That they have seen the injustice and are starting to really, there's a conscious shift saying we've got to do something about the injustice, which is really powerful. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. I just wanted to also highlight that in this campaign, we've used our platform to highlight some of the injustice facing Indigenous communities. And we took the national campaign with us to Counsel First Nations, as it was a nation among many that has discovered over 700 unmarked graves. And after the first finding in Kamloops of 215 kids, that there is really this pain that people are feeling around what residential institutions were all about. That they were by design to strip Indigenous people of their language, culture, identity, but also to strip them of their lives. And so that was something I wanted to highlight, that we've got a responsibility to bring every child home, in the sense of making sure communities can care for their children, but also every child that an Indigenous community wants to discover in other sites. We've got an obligation federally to support bringing those kids back home. So that's really important, and to highlight the injustice and the importance of implementing all of the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action. The second thing we did, we were in Nishkanda a couple of days ago, and for folks that didn't know Nishkanda, I'm sure you already know, it's one of the oldest water advisories in the country, a community that has not had clean drinking water for over 27 years. So we spoke to the community, and they highlighted their stories, and were really adamant that they wanted the media to tell their stories of resilience, but their stories also of pain, of suicide, of not having clean drinking water in the impacts, the struggles with housing. That was really important for us to fight for Indigenous people by sharing their stories, by lifting them up. And I just want to know that you can count on us to fight with everything we have for reconciliation, truth. The Nation Declaration, a real spirit of partnership, allyship, and nation-to-nation relationships. We're also pushing for the Canadian government to stop the legal battles against Indigenous kids. They continue to fight Indigenous kids in court, despite the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling that found that kids were willfully and recklessly discriminated against. So that remains a really strong position of ours. We want to see investments in housing in the Indigenous community for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy. We want to see Shannon's Dream implemented, equitable funding for Indigenous people. We want to see, in addition, not just the calls to action of the TRC, but also the calls to justice for the missing Indigenous women and girls. We want all those calls for justice also implemented. This is really important. I just also, in wrapping up, want to highlight how Mr. Trudeau called a selfish election. No reason for it. 2 years left in our mandate. Calling it in the midst of our fourth wave was the wrong thing to do. But it also meant that we couldn't continue the work we needed to do in Ottawa to continue to fight for Indigenous people, fight for language rights. And in some ways, this is really important. The final thing, I wanted to highlight how Justin Trudeau's promises end up costing us. There was a lot of nice things that he said. He's said a lot of words, but it sounds like it's all been for show because he has failed to deliver on things that could have been delivered. And people end up paying the price. When Mr. Trudeau doesn't bring in clean drinking water, Indigenous communities still struggle with a lack of a basic human right. And people are paying, there is a price to be paid from that inaction. I just want to also just broadly talk about a couple of our priorities. We know that people have gone through a tough time and then they want supports. So our plan is to invest more in the supports that people need. So that's healthcare, that's investing in making sure people get the medication covered, that people get the support and help they need. And I also want to highlight, while we want to invest in housing, invest in Indigenous communities, invest in the healthcare system, the big question people are asking, who's going to pay for it? We're the only party with a plan to make sure the billionaires pay their fair share. The burden should fall on the super rich. It shouldn't fall on the working class, middle class. It shouldn't fall on people. It should fall on those that haven't been paying their fair share, those who use offshore tax havens, loopholes, and the billionaires and the multimillionaires. They should be the ones paying their fair share. That's really important to us. And I guess finally, want to again reiterate that if we want to see clean drinking water, Indigenous housing, if we want to see healthcare invested in, if we want to see a real approach to fighting the climate crisis, New Democrats are the best choice to make that happen. So I can tell you in the last comment that with the new Democratic government, we would work as allies, as in partnership, nation-to-nation relationships with First Nations, respecting treaty rights. We work together to deliver on the key justice platforms that we've outlined. And you can count on us to be there for you, as we have throughout the pandemic. Just want you to know you can count on us. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Chair. Thank you so much for your presence. And thank you again to all the chiefs, to Grand Chief. Thanks for the opportunity, and to your staff and to your team for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you. Chair, you're still on mute.
Yeah, thank you very much. Rookie mistake. My apologies there. I did want to check with you in terms of your time. I do note that there is a question, essentially a bit of a question in the chat. And if you have a bit of time, I'll turn to that. I just want to be respectful of your time. And the question is basically that while there are, good commitments from your party and all the other parties, economic development often gets a little less attention. And so the question is really about supporting First Nations being involved through ownership of major projects and or other business incentives.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. And yeah, we have a couple minutes for questions. I just wanted to, thank you for the question. So in terms of economic development, one of the things that we found is that without a nation-to-nation approach, what happens is it is a detriment not only to any projects moving forward, but it's a detriment not only to the Indigenous community, but to all of Canada. And when projects that could be invested in that help us fight the climate crisis and reduce emissions, or great economic projects that could help spur economic activity that are within a framework, when they are not being invested in, or when they're not moving forward because lack of respect. This is economic development that is missed out by both Indigenous communities, but everybody else broadly. So there is a common interest for everyone's benefit to respect Indigenous community rights so that projects can move forward in a way and that
Thank you. There was a little bit of a stutter there on my end at the very end, but thank you very much for that. I am not seeing any other hands raised from our chiefs or proxies in our chat. Cookby Robbins, perhaps we'll turn to you, and that may be the last opportunity. Cookby Robbins from Muskegon in the Caribou Chilcotin region.
Thank you, Harold, Mr. Chair. First of all, my question is around the economic development piece that you just talked about. A lot of First Nations communities, especially the smaller areas in the rural and in those rural communities, what can you foresee if elected? What would you foresee doing for those smaller communities, those that are being left behind by big business and being run roughshod by big business, having their title and their rights ignored by big business? What is it that you're willing to do to support them?
Thank you, Chief, for the question. We absolutely support Indigenous communities and feel like the super rich, the big corporations, large and wealthy, ultra elite have been given free rein. And it's meant that Indigenous communities and other communities have suffered because of it. So our approach would be people first, First Nations, Indigenous communities, Inuit, Métis, people, workers should benefit first from any sort of agreements. And that approach is not the one we've seen. We've seen a lot of governments kind of prioritize the big lobbyists of these large corporations and to the detriment of Indigenous communities. That's something that I want to change.
And thank you, sir. I would note that Chief Charlene Gale from Fort Nelson First Nations has raised her hand, and it was her question that led off on the economic development of major projects in the chat. Over to you, Chief Gale.
Yeah, nice to be able to talk to you. So as an Indigenous person, and we're working towards economic development to really offset our own source revenue. And so what I'm seeing in Canada is that there's a lot of projects that are important to us as Indigenous people that meet our values and meet who we are. But my question to you is, what I'm also seeing is that a lot of these projects are delayed and there's extra cost because our Indigenous values aren't incorporated in them, and we're not being invited to have equity in these projects. First Nations on reserve are having a hard time getting money to be able to finance these projects, which is kind of leaving us behind. So what are your thoughts on federal loan guarantees for Indigenous communities?
It can be a powerful tool to support economic. I think what we need to do is unlock the capacity. There are so many things that Indigenous communities have knowledge on, have expertise on, and projects that are ready to go. And much like what we've seen over the past years, instead of an Ottawa knows best approach, instead of a dictating from top down, Indigenous communities can benefit from an approach which is based on collaboration, which is based on support. And a part of that is the economic and financial support. And so loan guarantees can be one tool to help us towards more economic development and activity that benefits Indigenous people instead of the very wealthiest.
Okay, I'd just like to hear a little bit more of that on the campaign trail. I haven't heard anything from your party and several other parties. So, I'm available if you would like to talk about my thoughts and my opinions on how that could be incorporated in your campaign trail. And if you're interested, I'll make myself available. So thank you. And I just wanted to say that, I really appreciate, you coming forward. And one of our band members said that your name kind of rhymes with dry meat. So I think that's funny. And I just had to share that with you as Indigenous people. When we like people, we make fun of each other. And so just good luck on your campaign trail, and wishing you success. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Chief, and it's a good point. There's so many things I wish we could raise more, but I'll try to figure out ways that we can raise it. And we've got the same tradition in my mother's language, where when you like somebody, when you're friends with them, you kind of like poke a little bit of fun. So I appreciate the love. Thank you so much, and please count on me as an ally. Thanks so much.
Okay, and perhaps one last one, if you do have time, sir. There's
Sure,
a
one
couple of
last one.
questions relating to the fiscal framework, so the fiscal relationship between First Nations and the federal government, particularly around reporting burden seems to be one of the issues. Some concerns there in terms of Indigenous employees and Indigenous knowledge not necessarily being compensated at equal value. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that fiscal relationship a little bit.
I think this speaks to the underlying, something that my friend Sol Momokwa says. He's a member of Richard Parliament in Ontario. He says, a lot of these systems people say are broken or aren't working. And he always comes back with the idea that no, they're actually working exactly the way they're intended. They're intended to colonize, they're intended to make Indigenous people feel inferior, be inferior. And that's their outcomes, that's what they're doing. So a part of putting extra burden on Indigenous communities that without the resources to be able to handle those burdens in terms of reporting obligations, or making sure or not having the fair compensation, equal compensation for the same work, which or not acknowledging the expertise that flows from Indigenous learnings. These are all symptoms of a broader problem of the systemic discrimination that exists in Canada that does not treat Indigenous people as equal, and that's why I'm noticing a bad connection. I hope it's been fixed. But yeah, I think it's a symptom of a broader problem, and why we are committed to overhauling the system, and why we think strongly that a lot of these problems can be fixed by political will. It's been really a lack of. It's not that the answers aren't there, the solutions are there. It's really the will hasn't been there. I am committed to getting this right, making sure Indigenous people have justice, and you can count on me for that.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps we are awaiting the indication from our electoral officer on the results of an online election that's happening as we speak, which is just wrapping up. So I'm trying to take as much of your time as I can until he tells me that we must turn to that attention. I did note that Chief Hobart has put some comments in the chat, and I just wanted to call on Chief James Hobart from Spuzzum First Nation if he wishes to address the leader.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, sir, and good luck in the campaign and in the election. Chief James Hobart from Spuzzum First Nation from the Electoral Nation. What I've seen is a gross oversight in Indigenous knowledge when it comes to the ministers, the different ministries, education, children and families, MSDPR, giving value to Indigenous knowledge, where we've been on the land, we've been in the nations with the different trials and tribulations that are out there that you're speaking of, and unless you've lived it, it's pretty hard to understand it. And we see in the different ministries with the different applications, the job applications, where one of our people that has, any of our people that have gone through the struggles to pull themselves up and to be there and help our people go further, being marginalized and as well minimalized in the pay grade. In order for them to move forward, they have to get some other documentation, when the reality is that you can't teach the Indigenous knowledge that a lot of these people have, and yet there's no value to it when it comes to the mainstream. It's overlooked, and it's really disturbing. It's troubling to see that happen, especially when there's people that are out there speaking on behalf of the nations, and they hire Indigenous people in the different ministries, and it feels like they're not there to be drawn upon for their information or their knowledge. They're just being there to be tokenized or to be numbered. And I really feel like that has to be addressed you know, we have to have some sort of, not just equality there. How many Indigenous people really stand up, I mean, to try to make a difference, and then to be found that that difference that has to come with a certain colonialized piece of paper that has to represent a certain level of other education before they can speak for their own nation, for their own people, and for some of the struggles that our people are going through. Unless you've been there on the reserves and in some of these homes, and you know, there's a lot of good things, there's a lot of happy times, there's a lot of joy that is being missed out on as well by people not observing more closely some of the beautiful things that are happening in our communities. But some of the struggles, you can't speak on them unless you've been around them. And we see people trying to speak on behalf of our children and our families in the education level and the children and families level. And it's really frustrating to see that. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Just hopefully that something can be done about that. Cooks-Cham.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Singh, and perhaps in a response and as well as your closing comments.
Sure, certainly. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief, for the question. And it touches on the previous question as well, just the disproportionate pay, not acknowledging Indigenous skills and expertise and knowledge, and a different way of recognizing that talent. If it does not have a form of a piece of paper, it's not recognized. I hear you on that. I see you on that. And I want to make sure you know that Democrats will continue to work to make sure that Indigenous communities get equity, not just equality, but equity means more than just treated equally, but remedying the injustice by going beyond that. And I want you to know we'll be there for you. In closing, I just want to say it's an honor to be able to share some words with you. Sorry for the bumpy ride. I'm on the bus. I'm literally on the campaign trail. So I'm driving along on the bus here. You saw the green light in the background. But I wanted to make sure that we were able to be here today. So thank you for your patience. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to all the chiefs. Thank you to the Grand Chief. Thank you to all the staff and to the team. And I'll put it to you again. We've been here for you. We'll fight for you. And we will continue to do that. And I look forward to Election Day where we can inspire more people, that we can bring in better as possible. And that we can have a world where we lift up Indigenous people with respect to dignity and human rights. And that's exactly what I'll do as leader and what my team will do. Thanks so much. Appreciate you all.
Thank you very much, sir. I do want to note that this is, we appreciate being on the bus. It's the first time being on a campaign bus for many of us. And so that's a unique experience. And I just want to extend really reiterate what you've heard, the appreciation, the respect, and the well wishes of the chiefs that you've heard during this call. And I wish you well and keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir. Thanks again to all the chiefs, Grand Chief. Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to let you know that the Chief Electoral Officer has let me know that the results are available, and we will turn to him.
Good afternoon, chiefs, proxies,
Recording
and
in progress.
others attending. I do have the results. I hope that you can hear me. I am unfortunately outside at the moment, so I will take you to the results in a moment, and I'm going to share the screen so that you can all see the results as I see them. The results are directly from the Simply Voting program, and share the screen here. Want to acknowledge as well before we get in there into the results, again to the candidates, thank you very much for taking part. And I know that it's always a challenge to take part in an election and to stand, so all my respect to both of you. It was an extremely close election. We had 55 votes of the 67 that were registered. So that's 82% of the voters cast a vote. And the results are here. We have Louisa Housey-Jones with 28 votes and Gina Edwards with 27 votes. Now that's an extremely close margin, I know, but that is a margin nevertheless. And with that, Louisa Housey-Jones is elected as the Bcafn Women's Council representative.
Thank you very much, Ron. As I understand it, we do have a honor song prepared, and I don't know if you wanted to speak to that before we played that.
Well, certainly, yes, again, just appreciating the candidates again for taking part, and I think both should be honored for their efforts in the election. So much respect to both of them again.
Thank you very much. So let us play the honor song, and then following that, we will hear from the re-elected BCAFN Women's Council representative, plus the two acclaimed board members, Chief Harvey Macleod and Chief Linda Price, if they are available. We are not hearing the video of the audio or the audio of the video. There is a share computer sound when you're sharing. We've had to make some technical adjustments. Well, let's give them a moment to get that reset. Fortunately, still no sound. Again, we'll do a brief reset on that.
You don't.
This next song is to honor the newly elected BCAFN representatives. It is a spirit song, so it honors the men and the women. And it just invites, you know, those ancestors that have gone before us to be with us in a good way. This next song is to honor.
Can't hear you, Harold.
Thank you. I seem to be making some rookie mistakes today. How's that sound? Better? Test 1, 2.
It's good.
All right, thank you very much. As you can see, I've had to make some adjustments as well, and I'm just working off my laptop. So let us turn our attention then to the re-elected BCAFN Women's Council Representative, Louise Helster-Jones, and then we will look to the two board members who have been acclaimed to see for their remarks as well. You're muted, Louisa. There you go.
You can hear me? Yeah. Good afternoon, chiefs and staff. Wow. I'm extremely honored and excited to be able to carry on the work that I've been doing the past 3 years. I'd just like to thank everybody that that voted and continue to have their trust in me. I'm really thankful right now, and you know, I'm going to continue on with the work that I've been doing over the past 3 years and more. This is my passion, as I mentioned yesterday, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Louisa, and congratulations. Chief Harvey Macleod.
Today I'm calling in from the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. I've been here now for a few days, and I'm the Almihom chief for Upper Nicolabat, Okanagan Nation. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you all today and to let you know that it's very humbling to stand up and say, I'd like to be a part of the change that we're going through in this province and across the country. I'd like to start off by acknowledging and thanking the leaders that signed my support papers, Chief Lise Behan, Chief Chris Derrickson, Chief Keith Crow, Chief Byron Lewis, Chief Greg Gabriel, and Chief David Jimmy. And there were others that I've engaged and had dialogue before I submitted the application to be a director for our organization. It's been a challenging, especially challenging 2 years for all of us in so many different ways. First with the pandemic, and then more recently with the atrocities that were uncovered in residential schools and the place where I went to school in Kamloops, the finding of the 215. And more recently with the devastation caused by the fires in our communities, and our hearts and our prayers go out to communities in Lytton and Okanagan and other areas that were really hit hard by the devastation of the fires. It just goes to prove that we have a lot to do as people. And I know that we as people and leaders in this country, we have solutions to remedy and to provide a safer environment for not only the land itself, but for our families and our community. The change that we're embarking on now is not only happening in the legislative halls in Ottawa and Victoria. I see the change happening in our own communities. We are seeing the atrocities of the Indian Act, and we are so desperately looking for ways on how we can stand up ourselves, stand up our families, stand up our communities, and take our rightful place in our homelands. in this country. And it's going to be exciting, and it's going to be a lot of work by a lot of different individuals and leaders to make the change happen. It's a slow process and a challenging process. And we're going to be needing the support and your voice to make that change possible. Acknowledging the women's representatives. Congratulations, Louisa. And also to share and advise Gina, we need you. We need your voice. You come from an area, an upbringing that allows you to use your voice, use your education, and use your passion for people. And we need that passion. We need that voice, speaking for the women, speaking for the children, speaking for the families. Continue to be engaged with us and supporting the many initiatives that we have going on in this country. So with that, I thank you for being with us over the last few days in this conference, in this assembly, and take care. There is a lot happening out there, still a lot happening out there. COVID is still alive and well in this country, in our villages, in our communities, and in our families. And it's a situation or a health concern that we all have to pay some attention to and find ways on how we're going to keep our families and our communities safe. So with that, have a really good day. And again, thank you for the support given to this assembly. And I'd like to close off by thanking our staff who work so hard on your behalf to achieve the many results and put on tables the issues that we need to address and give us the support to do our work. So I'd like to thank our staff. So with that, White Limerick.
Thank you very much, Chief Macleod. Let us turn our attention to Chief Linda Price of Cultural First Nation.
Good morning, everyone. I would just like to say thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you today. I just really appreciate that. I just want to say good afternoon to BC Regional Chief TG, the Board of Directors and staff, and respected chiefs, proxies and elders and guests, and Chinalia to the Coast Salish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish for hosting the 18th BC AGM in your territory. I'd also like to thank the Knowledge Keepers for your words and prayers, and our chairman, Turbell, for keeping us on track. Congrats to Chief Macleod and also to Ms. Husty Jones, and thank you, Ms. Edwards, for putting your name forward. I'd also like to thank my nominators, Chief Clarence Louie from Osuyus, Chief Leah Stump from NASCO, Chief Sam Schooner from New Halt Nation, and Chief Dalton Silver from Sumas, as well as Chief Jimmy Lula from Honeywood Dean. My name is Linda Price. I'm a member of the Algacho First Nation. We're located at Nakwantlu and Anaheim Lake. I'm Newhawk with Dacath carrier ancestry. My late great-grandfather was Chief Domus Squinas. He was Newhawk from Stewie and Nakwantlu. I was recently elected in June 22nd, 2021 as Chief of UFN. I've served in my community as chief from 2005 to 2009, and then I got elected in June of 2019 and served a 2-year term. And I recently got elected to another 2-year term, which ends in 2023. I just want to say that I'm a very proud mother of Carrie and Kayla Price, and also I have my daughter-in-law, Angela, and son-in-law, Yannick. And I also have 3 beautiful grandchildren, Liv, Millie, and Lincoln. So proud of my family. Just to give you a bit of background, I have a degree in First Nations Studies with a minor in political science, and I received my Juris Doctorate of Law degree from TRU in 2015. I have many years of experience serving on boards, which include the UFN Band Council, Union of BC Indian Chiefs Executive, BC First Nations Leadership Council, School District 27 School Trustee, Board of Governors for the University of Northern British Columbia, Director of the Caribou Chilcotin Aboriginal Education and Training Center, as well as Director of First Nations Schools Association. I also served as the president for the West Chilcotin Forest Products and a director of Yankawit 10 Forest. I also served on my tribal council, Caribou Chilcotin Tribal Council. I was the founding director of the BC First Nations Forestry Council and also director on the Ninkani Wellness Center Society. And I've served on task groups for the province of BC. I'm very honored and humbled to be acclaimed to serve on the Bcafn Board of Directors. I will work as a team on the strategic priorities and objectives. There are many important matters facing Indigenous communities in BC on several fronts. I look forward to working with the Bcafn Regional Chief and representatives to support the Bcafn members' direction and priorities and uphold the Bcafn bylaws and regulations. I would just like to thank the staff of the Bcafn for your contribution in putting together such a successful AGM. And I just want to say to all of you, chiefs and everyone present today, to stay safe and well, and Chanalia for your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that. As you may have noticed from our participants list, this is all the business that we're able to deal with today. And I do want to thank everybody for their participation. I take comfort in the fact that your board and your regional chief and your staff know exactly how to manage the issue of resolutions not making it to the floor here in the assembly, and so that'll be properly handled, and I take some comfort in that. I did want to let you know that the regional chief is currently in a vote on the AFN National Executive Committee table, and so is unable to join us at this precise moment. Perhaps Chief Harvey Macleod, speaking on behalf of the board, I'll ask you to provide some brief closing remarks if I could, and then we will turn to the knowledge keepers for their closing.
Over the last few days, we've had some really good discussion and reporting out on the work that we're undertaking as BC Assembly of First Nations and other work that we're conducting with the Leadership Council, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and the Summit. There are so many good things happening right now, positive things in our little worlds that will need your attention, your support as we move forward. I look at the discussions like we had this morning on cannabis. It's all around jurisdiction, us having a say, us being involved, and us having control over what happens in our communities. And I look at C41 and the DRIPA and C15 and seeing the opportunities that are there. And I know that it's going to take a lot of work to convince our colonial governments that there is opportunity for real change. If they are committed to the process, there's opportunity for some real change there that will make a big difference in this country and in our homelands. We have many needs. Some of them we touched on, but in local community, we still deal with education, health. So important, housing, so important. And them challenges will continue to be there. And I know that with the focus, as we move forward, we're going to be making a dent in the needs of our families and our communities. It's not going to go away, and we have to find answers for them. And I look at the 215 and the many other unmarked graves that are being searched for, that we as individuals, we as families and communities and leaders have to be there for our people. They're going to need us. We're going to need each other as we move forward. I know that I personally have been challenged by the findings, and I'm finding some positives in my life now that's going to make a big difference in who I am and the relationship with that I have within my family. That's going to have a positive impact with community. So we'll have to continually to support one another to really change our past. We so need to change our past and find a safe place where we thrive in life. And this is why we spend so much time looking for them opportunities to make a difference in community. So on behalf of Regional Chief Terry, again, thank the leadership that have participated and gave voice, that allowed us to see, hear, feel, and understand where you're coming from, so that when we're doing our work, that voice is heard. I'd like to thank Dr. Gwen and Chief Robert, who are always here to support and to give us the grounding and understanding that we don't do this work alone, that we'll always have their support. And I thank the staff for Bcafn and the staff in our own communities for all of the work that they do to support us, to sit and be available to meet in forums like this. When we meet in forums like this, we leave our community and the work doesn't get less because we're gone. It gets more challenging. So I thank all of the individuals and the administrative staff that support the work that they do for leadership and for the work that they do for our communities. I ask and pray that you take care of yourself. We have a ways to go before we can overcome COVID, before we overcome the atrocities of residential school, and continue to uplift the many thoughts and ideas and plans and dreams that we have as people to bring them into a reality. So I ask that you take care, and thank you for joining us. White Limlet, thank you.
And thank you very much. We will turn it over to Dr. Gwendolyn Point and Chief Robert Joseph, our knowledge keepers, for their closing remarks, protocol, and prayers. And when they are finished, the 18th annual general meeting for the Bcafn will be adjourned. Just one note, we did receive very late word that the Prime Minister has prepared a video. It has not yet arrived. It will be posted when it arrives.
Recording
Over to you,
stopped.
Gwen and Robert.
I'm going to jump in and have Gwen close the meeting. She is so gracious and always inspired.